What is up, health enthusiasts? It's Coach Lamby here for Working Weights LLC, your guide to strength, health, and all things nutrition. I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, Dwayne Ulrich,
Hey
aka
there.
Poppy Twirl.
Hey there. Good to see you guys.
Today we are discussing whether or not cholesterol helps with muscle gain. All right,
Wow.
Dwayne, how you doing?
Good, man. I'm kind of normally I come in and I go, man, I'm super excited about this conversation, but I'm kind of spooked out about cholesterol and muscle gain.
Yeah, this is new to you. You haven't heard this yet, so
No clue. So I'm the average man ombudsman whose mind is going to be blown today.
yeah. So this concept is new to me as well. So our friend Philip Pape over there at Wits and Weights did a podcast episode the other day on this very topic. And so I was listening to it because it's kind of an interesting concept in like how could cholesterol, primarily we're talking about dietary cholesterol,
Right.
but like how could that help with muscle gain or muscle strength, with resistance training. So it was interesting to think about and to hear. And so then he threw us a shout out and then asked, kind of made reference to like whether we could pick this thing apart or not. And so I said, okay. And so basically he kind of did his own review over an article by a gentleman named Menno Henselman. And he's pretty big in the strength and fitness area online, as well as nutrition. I think he is a scientist of sorts. So what we're going to do is so this isn't really a reaction to Philip's podcast, but we're going to be like, this is two different takes on the same article.
Cool.
All right. So
Cool.
we'll get into this. Now, what I didn't do today, or what I didn't do for this, because I actually had a different topic in mind to discuss today. And so when this came up on Philip's podcast, and I thought, I found this to be so interesting that I just went through this. So what I don't have to link in the show notes is a bunch of annotated PDFs, because I just went through this pretty quickly in order to just be able to formulate my own opinion on this article and produce a podcast. And so going forward, everybody know that all of these probably warrant some extra digging into and evaluating the evidence. So just keep that in mind as we go forth. But this is Menno Henselman's website here, his blog post, and this is one of the articles that he has on there. Is cholesterol the forgotten anabolic? And anabolic basically just means a state of growth. Muscular growth is what we're talking about. So cholesterol is a small fat-like molecule that supposedly clogs our arteries and kills us. But is cholesterol really the bad guy? Or maybe it's the opposite, a lifter's best friend. So I think overall, the kind of like proposition or the hypothesis, we might say, is that both dietary cholesterol and serum cholesterol are going to help with gaining muscle and strength. So he starts in here right away, just right out of the gate with some research, and we got a bunch of links to go through. And so this first one here is a studies, and so he writes in here, this study found that cholesterol may be good for your gains. In their study, 49 elderly individuals completed a 12-week strength training program with nutritional guidelines. Retrospective analysis of participants' nutritional logs showed a linear dose-response relationship between dietary cholesterol intake and lean body mass increases. The more cholesterol they consumed, the more muscle they gained. This relationship held up when protein and fat intake were controlled for. And so he inserts this figure here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into all of these fellas here. And so normally when you click on a link, it'll bring you up to this. And I think this is a good podcast example to show people kind of how I go about finding studies when the PubMed link doesn't really give you the whole thing. I think this one does, though. Yeah. So we have the whole study here. So reading just the abstract is going to give you kind of a sense of how the study was designed, executed, and the takeaways that the researchers had. But what we're interested in is really going in and looking at graphs and charts, and we want to see the numbers produced from this. So what I did for all of these is I just kind of went to the hot spots. So intervention here. So I want to know who these people are. So who is our population within this study? How long was the study? What exactly did they do? How did they assess dietary intakes? All of that stuff. And so we can see that this was 12 weeks long. He summed everything up pretty well in his little paragraph there. They have their statistical analysis and then what we're interested in the results. So I'm going to go straight down to our graphs here. Now he linked this chart in his article, and we see that we have 3 other charts here. And so what I found interesting here is that, yes, there is a stepwise linear increase with the more cholesterol consumption that somebody had, the more increase in lean body mass they had. But there was also a difference in whether or not people took statins and then the type of statin that they took. So I don't know if I can blow this up. Yeah, and it's hard to see, but I think this says atorvastatin and simvastatin, and that's represented by this kind of gray dot diamond matrix thing. And then we have pravastatin and lovastatin, which is in the diagonal slashed bars here. And we can see that the pravastatin, lovastatin groups had more increases in lean body mass. They also started out with more increase or more lean body mass than did the other groups. And both statin groups actually had an increase over no statin. This is important to remember as we go forward in this article here, okay? And we're going to scroll down here to some other stuff. And so also what I really wanted to see was whether or not everyone actually gained any muscle mass, because that's kind of the hypothesis here. And so we want to make sure that that's happening. So at the top of this chart here, we can see they have the intakes of dietary cholesterol split out into quartiles, so fourths. And our bottom quartile, what I'm looking for is weight. So pre-training, they started out at 82.1 kilograms and post-training was 80.7. So they actually lost weight during this 12-week intervention. Our next group started out at 82.4, ended up at 81.4. So they lost weight as well. And then our third tertile, they kind of maintained their weight. And then the upper, or not tertile, sorry, quartile. And then the upper quartile, so the highest amount of cholesterol intake, they gained a little bit of weight. So what this kind of tells me is I could not find the supplemental table for dietary intake. So I don't know what they were eating per macronutrients. Now this says that they equated for protein, but the fact that these 2 lower quartile groups here lost weight tells me that they were in a calorie deficit.
Yeah.
Now being in a calorie deficit can affect whether or not you are going to see increases in muscle mass or lean mass rather. And then also a reduced amount of calories usually is going to translate into a reduced amount of protein. So I question whether or not the protein actually was equated between these groups. And it certainly calories was not equated. So I think that those are not confounders, but those are mediating variables that I don't think were taken into account here. And as we go down, we can also see in lean mass that our lower quartile, so the least amount of cholesterol intake, they really didn't have any change in lean mass, right? And then our second to lowest quartile, they had a little bit of an increase, and then we see this stepwise increase as we go up. So I think that there definitely had to have been a difference in protein intake, and there certainly was a difference in caloric intake, because if you were in caloric maintenance, and I think at the top of this, they actually say that most of the participants were all participants had a caloric intake that was equal to or greater than that required for energy balance as predicted by resting energy expenditure. So that obviously is not true, because if they were consuming enough food for caloric maintenance for energy balance, no one would have lost any weight.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So that's an issue that I have with that study there. The second study here is actually a broken link. So this is what comes up. So there's nothing that I can go into and evaluate on that. This third study here, I can open it up, but we're just going to talk about this. So this study found that whole eggs stimulated myofibrillar protein synthesis than the same amount of protein from egg whites. Now, what this study is looking at here, so the question is, or the hypothesis rather, is that cholesterol, dietary cholesterol intake is going to aid the increase in muscle mass, lean body mass, and muscle strength. When we look at studies that are very, very short term, and most of these studies that are looking at muscle protein synthesis, and I think that this one specifically looks at like post exercise. Yeah, and so this is also in 10 people, so there's 10 whole people in this study. This is a crossover trial, so I mean, it was a good design. It's a little low in the number of participants. Yeah, and so after exercise, participants consumed intrinsically leucine labeled whole eggs, which is kind of cool that we can actually label, specific
Yeah.
proteins and stuff.
Right.
Or egg whites. Repeated blood and muscle biopsy samples were collected to assess whole body leucine kinetics, intramuscular signaling, and myofibrillar protein synthesis. So all of these things. So we're looking at a very short period of time after exercise, and we're seeing these increases in these certain blood markers. Now, what that does not give me is whether or not when they were eating egg yolks versus just the egg whites, did they see an increase in muscle mass? Right. And so the hypothesis is that if you consume more dietary cholesterol, you will see greater increases in muscle gain than if you did not. And this study does not answer that question. It tells us that we see increases in myofibrillar response and muscle protein synthesis, but it doesn't tell us whether that equates to more muscle mass at 12 weeks. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Basically, they're giving you half of the equation. They're saying the response is higher, but that doesn't equate to muscle mass increase.
Right. We don't know that is going to translate to actual
Yeah.
increases in muscle mass.
Right.
All right. And then he has 3 more studies listed down here below. Now, all of these are hidden behind paywalls. And so if you're going to make a public post on something and you're going to link to stuff that is hidden behind paywalls or requires special access, I don't understand the point of it. Right. So,
Yeah.
but anyways,
Yeah.
again, these are all kind of the same thing. Again, found beneficial effects of a high cholesterol intake for muscle growth and strength development, though the effects were more modest than the previous study, and it's unclear if protein intake was controlled for. Now, this fella here, this Reichman and Gassier, is the same individual that did this one before, and we can see in this study that there was a difference in caloric intake, at least. So we can assume that protein probably, well, let's just not assume. So even the author in this article is saying it's unclear if protein intake was controlled for, and we know that protein intake is a mediating variable on the outcome in question. So
Right.
that leaves us to question whether or not this specific study would be good evidence towards the hypothesis. We
Right.
have another one here by the same researcher. found a dose-response relationship between cholesterol intake and strength development, but not lean body mass. And again, it's unclear if protein intake was controlled for. So again, with the same thing, protein's a mediating variable, and if that's not controlled for, then we can just submit an alternative hypothesis, which is that the cholesterol intake is just a proxy measurement for protein. And so how do we know that the increases in muscle strength, this linear dose response, isn't just a matter of consuming more protein, right? So what evidence is there that the proposition is more supported by his hypothesis than the alternative hypothesis? And then same thing here. This one's behind a paywall. So this one also, they didn't find an effect going from 0.9 grams per kilogram of protein today to 1.2. And that's quite a substantial increase in protein. And the fact that they didn't find any difference due to that variation, I find to be highly suspect.
Yeah, and then the study was statistically underpowered to research the topic. So,
Yeah.
to the common man, those three studies tell us absolutely nothing.
Yeah, they don't give us a lot to go on there. All right.
Yeah.
So going down here, we get into research on statins. Research on statin also hints a beneficial role of cholesterol for your muscles. Statins are a type of medicine used in the treatment of various cardiovascular heart-related problems. Statins lower your cholesterol, and a common side effect is myopathy, which is like muscle pain, muscle fatigue. Statin therapy can reduce muscle strength and functionality, induce inflammation in your muscles, and even compete muscle fiber death, which is rhabdomyolysis. And you may have just heard of it referred to as rhabdo.
Right.
So what he's saying here is that we may find a benefit of cholesterol because when people take statins, we're seeing a reduction in muscle mass. We see these muscle fatigue happening and pain and a loss of strength and stuff. Now, this kind of becomes a problem for him because if we go back up to the very top here in this paper, remember when we looked at the graphs comparing statin versus no statin, the groups taking statins did better than the group taking no statin, even at lower cholesterol intakes. So his own evidence, the first one that he cited, kind of puts this claim about
They're at odds with each
statin.
other.
I lost it. Yeah, it's kind of contradictory within the own article here. Also, we can just throw out an alternative hypothesis to the statin thing is that, well, if statins are producing this effect of myopathy, then how do we know, what evidence is there that this result is due to cholesterol levels and not just an impact of muscle fatigue and muscle pain? And so thereby the people taking statins are just getting less activity and experiencing atrophy due to just decreased activity levels because it hurts to move around.
Wow.
So we go down here. He talks about some lacto-ovo-vegetarian diets, and those tend to result in less muscle growth than omnivorous diets in strength trainees, even with the same protein intake. So let's go into this study here. And so this is a good example of when you find a link to a study and all you can really find is the abstract, and what we're really looking for is the data within there. We want those graphs, we want those tables. So you can take and highlight the title, copy that. We're going to open a new tab, paste and search. And I really like Science Direct. They tend to, when you open something up, they generally tend to have the whole thing. And so we can see here, we have the whole thing. So we're going to get into this fella. All right, so let's go down. We want the tables and everything. So on the left is our lacto-ovo-vegetarian diet. On the right is the mixed diet. We have baseline versus week 12. for both of those fellas. So again, we want to look at weight. So in our lacto-ovo vegetarian diet, we see they started out at baseline 93.6 kilos, ended up at 92.5. So again, we have a weight loss happening, which means caloric deficit. In our mixed group, we see they started out at 90.2 kilos, ended up at 90.6. So there kind of wasn't any change in weight there, which means they were at least in caloric maintenance. BMI, we see a reduction in BMI in the lacto-vegetarian group. We see a small increase in the mixed group. Arm circumference. Now, oddly enough, the vegetarian group started out with a smaller arm circumference than the mixed group, but they both ended up having the same size arm circumference. And kind of the same deal here for the mid-thigh percentage of body fat. So that we see the percentage of body fat in the vegetarian group went up, and in the mixed group, it went down.
That's weird.
Okay, so yes, so we have some weird outcomes here that if protein actually was equated and calories were equated between these groups, we're seeing some weird results here. Now, I think these guys do have, yes, here we go. All right, so on the left here, we have pre-study, week 1, week 11. And in this trial, what they did is they collected 4 days worth of dietary assessment, and they only did it at week 1 and week 11. All right, so what that means is that for the week of week 1 and week 11, we are missing 40% of the dietary data. And for the whole trial, so over 11 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever this was, I think this was 12 weeks, we're missing about 90% of the data.
Yeah.
All right, so going back through all of our episodes, particularly our sodium episode, how is the dietary measurement being assessed? Right. And in this one, they actually are measuring protein and caloric intake based on calculated average from those 4-day dietary assessments. So we don't actually know whether or not protein and calories were actually equated here because it's a calculated assessment based on missing data. But anywho, let's go. Our lacto-ovo vegetarian group pre-study, everyone was consuming around 102 grams of protein. At week 1, our lacto-vegetarian group was 79. So there's a big reduction in protein that happened there. And in our mixed group as well, they dropped to 82. At week 11, our vegetarian group protein dropped to 71, and our mixed group went up to 91. So going back to his thing here, it says even with the same protein intake, these obviously did not have the same protein intake.
No, and did you look at the spreads? Plus or minus like
Yeah.
9,
so this,
plus or minus 8.
So the standard deviation is much wider there.
Huge.
And so as a percent of total energy, so somebody might say, well, these gram amounts aren't really that much different. Well, so between 71 and 91 is 20 grams. And so you might say at the end of the day, like, is 20 grams really going to make that much of a difference? However, as a percentage of total energy at week 11 here, 71 grams makes up 12%, where this 91 grams makes up 17% of their total caloric intake. And when we think about protein intake in grams per kilogram of body weight, just like most things, we kind of expect to see this linear. If we were plotted on a graph X and Y, we would expect to see just this linear. The more protein intake I get, the more muscle building response that I get. It's actually an asymptotic shape. Which means it goes up very rapidly in the beginning. And then as you start to increase that protein intake, about 1.5, 1.6 grams, we start to see it kind of plateau off and it flattens out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So at these lower ranges of protein intake, because 91 grams of protein, 71 grams of protein, I think anyone would probably say is going to be the lower range of protein intake. If I was coaching these individuals, I would like to see them consuming more than that. And so at these lower intakes of protein, the difference in 20 grams on that asymptote is a much bigger translation into muscle outcomes than we would see at the top. So if it was 20 grams and we were looking at 1.5, 1.6 grams per kilogram, well, the difference in 20 grams isn't going to make as much difference as it does down there in the 70 and 90 gram range.
Right. I understood all that, by the way.
Okay, great.
I was with you the whole way.
I hope the listener explain that. So the lacto-vegetarian diet group, that piece of evidence there, really not equated for calories or protein. So again, if we have the hypothesis that cholesterol is kind of this thing driving increases in muscle gain and strength, and our alternative hypothesis is that cholesterol is just a proxy measurement for protein intake, and it's actually the protein and calories that's driving the increases in muscle mass and strength gain in these studies, what evidence is there that the proposition is supported under the hypothesis and not the alternative hypothesis?
Yeah, so we really don't know cholesterol has anything to do with it.
Not yet. Based on the evidence here. Yeah.
All right, here we go.
So all in all, the available research suggests a high cholesterol diet is good for muscle growth and strength development. I don't find that to be the case so far. So we're getting into some mechanisms of action here. So the mainstream media demonizes cholesterol based on its potential effects in your blood. If you've been basing your perception of cholesterol around that message, you may be surprised to find that cholesterol has several potential mechanisms of action to increase muscle growth. And we can see that this is a link here. So we're going to click on it. And when you read articles for yourself and you're trying to, figure out whether this article may have some information that's beneficial to you, click on all the links. Okay.
Yeah.
And so what we get to here is a website for a book. And again, this is hidden behind a paywall here. Right. So what purpose this serves to the general public audience, I'm not really sure. And I tire of people who link to things that are hidden behind access walls.
I think these are people who just feel like they really think a lot of themselves, you know. When most of the data that we study, even with the dietary recommendations we did on the last podcast, that stuff's public. It's public knowledge. It's public intake. So if you're hiding it behind, well, you got to buy my book to find out. Yeah, maybe I don't want to read your book. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, this one I think is just a link to what we say this, a textbook, like it's an online textbook, which is fine. You can probably, if you were to do some digging and some research, you could probably find the same explanation of the mechanism of action there in a textbook that is publicly available. But yeah, so he's linking it to something that you have to sign up for and you have to pay for, and I think that that's not the best way to go about providing evidence to the general public. So he talks about cholesterol increases membrane viscosity, which may influence membrane stability, and this may have an influence on the extent to which muscle cells are damaged during exercise and the magnitude of the inflammatory response. Now, he doesn't give a link to substantiate this claim here, but I did some digging here. And what we find is that the cell membrane is not a homogeneous structure, meaning it's not the same, like at the front of the cell, it's not the same as the back of the cell. So this is a very different structure all the way around it. Some spots of it are going to be more viscous than other spots of it. And we also find that increased viscosity, so we see changes in membrane viscosity or its reciprocal fluidity have been linked with disease states and have been proven as useful indicators of cell viability. Furthermore, increases in membrane viscosity have been reported with the onset of atherosclerosis, malignancy, diabetes, and hypercholesterolemia. So there may be, so let's just take on its face that this increase in cholesterol increases membrane viscosity, and that somehow has this mediating effect on how much the muscle is damaged, how fast it repairs, and inflammation levels and all that. So let's say that does translate to more muscle growth and strength in the outcome. This could actually be a double-edged sword. So while you are increasing your muscle strength and your muscle gains, you're also increasing your risk for these disease states here. So it may not be 100% beneficial. Cholesterol seems to play a role in the muscle repair process by controlling inflammation. Muscle damage creates inflammation, which leads to the recruitment of immune cells to assist recovery. See our article on why inflammation, like cholesterol, is wrongly demonized. Now, if you click on this is an article on inflammatory, and cholesterol is not mentioned in here at all. So I'm not sure how this article support. This mostly just talks about exercise and the inflammatory response due to it, but it doesn't talk about cholesterol at all. Cholesterol is essential for lipid raft formation. Lipid rafts assemble the components for signaling pathways and enhance signaling between pathways that play an important role for muscle hypertrophy, such as the growth factors IGF-1 and mTOR. Cholesterol depletion can lead to protein missorting, which reduces the signal transduction. Activation of mTOR corresponds with the found increase in myofibrillary protein synthesis after cholesterol consumption. So after all of that, so when I look up cholesterol and inflammation, or I'm sorry, we're on the mTOR thing now. Yeah, but going back to the inflammation deal, when I looked up cholesterol and inflammation, I could only find negative associations between cholesterol and inflammation. And the general consensus between all of these articles. And I have a mind map, which is my notes, and I will link that in the articles as well. And I have some links to that. And the consensus between those is that the lower your cholesterol is, the better, as far as inflammation is concerned. Now, as far as the mTOR, the IGF-1, no citations are given to validate this. And then if we look to the general public, with an average total cholesterol for adults 20 years and older, total cholesterol being 191 for the average and LDL being 130, I find the notion that anyone possibly experiencing cholesterol depletion to be highly unlikely and more than likely rare. So the idea that we need to consume more cholesterol because of this cholesterol depletion thing happening, I don't think actually holds up. Because when we look at the averages for the population, cholesterol is considered to be high on all fronts anyway. So cholesterol depletion possibly could benefit people in long-term health outcomes.
Yeah, but it can't be too drastic, right? Cholesterol depletion. I mean, your body needs some.
Your body needs some, so we're going to talk about that. He does get that down there into the bottom. And that's a good question. Your body needs some, and how much is it? We'll get down there. I missed a thing here. Going back up to the vegetarian group, if we remember all the way back to our first podcast episode on plant protein versus animal protein, and we actually can look at, so he provided his study on the vegetarians versus the mixed. I think that this study is a much better example of to answer the question that we're looking for, a comparison between habitual vegans and omnivores. So if you remember, this is the one where they took habitual vegans and then habitual omnivores, and they put them, both groups, through resistance training for however it was. And we have Stuart Phillips was part of this, Hamilton Rochelle. So these are some pretty big names here. They went 12 weeks.
I remember
and
this.
both groups were consuming 1.6 kilograms per day. So we would find that amount of protein intake to be sufficient to drive muscle increases. And so we're looking at a zero cholesterol diet versus a moderate cholesterol diet. And at the end of that, what we find is that there was no difference between the two groups in outcomes for the increase in muscle mass, the increase in lean body tissue, or increase in strength. And this study here is actually, they did account for protein. Everybody was equated for protein and everybody was equated for calories because nobody was losing weight on this.
Yeah, it was a larger sample group as well
Mm-hmm.
over a longer period of time too.
And then looking at that, well, I think it was the same length. It was about 12 weeks.
Was it? I thought it was
But
more. Okay, 12 weeks.
yeah,
Fine. That's good.
12 weeks is about the norm here.
Okay.
So, but this cholesterol depletion notion can lead to protein missorting. So vegans on average tend to have much, much lower serum cholesterol levels than do omnivores. And again, in that study, and there are multiple studies that are more recent than what he's citing, looking between vegan populations and omnivorous populations at these outcomes that we're concerned with is actually, am I actually going to gain more muscle by eating more cholesterol? And we find no difference between the groups when the studies are actually executed properly. So most of these studies in here are designed very well, but the execution of them I find to be lacking. So he says, simply put, cholesterol can help your muscle cells resist damage and can improve their ability to repair themselves after your workouts, which is crucial for muscle growth. Now, on its face, that statement there, I don't think is really false, but it doesn't speak to, well, how much cholesterol, right?
Yep. Yep.
He goes on to say cholesterol can also improve your gains indirectly. Cholesterol is the precursor for anabolic hormones and is crucial for their production. That's true. However, simply having high serum cholesterol level or eating a ton of dietary cholesterol doesn't necessarily lead to increased testosterone or more lean body mass gain by itself. Now, I'm not really sure why he put that in there, but he's kind of cutting his own legs out from under him with that statement, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, so the limiting factor of anabolic hormone production is often the transport of cholesterol into mitochondria, where its turnover takes place, not necessarily the amount of cholesterol available in the bloodstream. And we have a link there. We're going to look at this. And again, it's to that same institution where you have to
pay money.
So yeah, so there's nothing that we can gain from that link. So increased dietary cholesterol intake doesn't lead to increases in the testosterone level in all studies. And so, so right away the concession is made that high serum or dietary cholesterol doesn't actually equal an increase in testosterone. So however, we do have indirect evidence from the literature on saturated fat that a typical high cholesterol diet increases testosterone production. Saturated fat is a building block for cholesterol, which is in turn used for testosterone production. And then he cites another study here. A low saturated fat intake is associated with reduced testosterone production. For example, men going from a 40% fat diet with a high saturated fat intake to a 25% fat diet with a low saturated fat intake experience a decrease in total and free testosterone levels going back to their original diet, cause testosterone levels to increase again. And several other studies have also found that diets low in saturated fat reduce circulating testosterone levels.
Did he just contradict himself?
How do you think he contradicted himself?
Well, I'm just go up to the paragraph before that a little bit farther. Okay. We do not have indirect evidence from the literature of saturated fat that typical high cholesterol diet increases testosterone production. Saturated fat's a building block for cholesterol, which in turn is used for testosterone production. And then go down to the next one.
Mm-hmm.
A low saturated fat intake is associated with reduced testosterone production. For example, men going from 40% fat diet, high saturated fat intake to a 25% experienced a decrease in total and free testosterone levels going back to their original diet because testosterone levels causing testosterone levels to increase again. Okay, so that confuses me.
Okay, so what he's saying is that when we consume cholesterol in our diet, that's going to come from animal sources. And when we consume fat from animal sources, that comes in the form of saturated fat. What he's saying up here is that we do have indirect evidence from saturated fat diets that are high in cholesterol, and we see an increase in testosterone production. So he cites a study where there's a high fat diet that's high in saturated fat, and then they shift everybody to this lower fat diet, lower in saturated fat, and we see testosterone levels drop.
Okay.
When they bring
Okay.
everybody back up to high saturated fat, we see the testosterone levels increase.
Okay. Okay. Got it. Got it.
Yeah. And so this link does give us, I'm sorry, this one doesn't. Okay. So yeah, so this doesn't give us the whole study, right? We're just looking at an abstract. So again, what we're going to do, copy the title and then paste it in the search bar and see if we can find a link that does give us. So Science Direct, I always like Science Direct, but this one doesn't have it either. Okay. So what we're looking at here is a link to a study that we can't access. Now, just based on the information that we have, I can already generate an alternative hypothesis to this. So in this study, they not only reduced saturated fat, but they reduced total fat. So the total fat content of the diet. So if they had kept it at 40% fat, high saturated fat, and then transitioned everyone to a 40% fat but low saturated fat diet, I think that would have been a better design rather than 40% fat down to 25% fat. So how do we know that what were the change in testosterone that we're seeing is due to saturated fat and it's not just due to the reduction in total fat? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah. My mind is starting to swim here.
Okay.
Just saying, it's starting to swim.
So I argue that the decrease in testosterone is a transient effect by cutting the fat in the diet in half. Okay. Not really dependent on the amount of saturated fat that was in the diet, but just that we cut the total fat in half.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. I'm with you.
All right. So we also have another problem here is that dietary saturated fat is not required in order for your cholesterol production. So what your body produces in terms of cholesterol. So the fat that you make, that your body makes through de novo lipogenesis or the alteration of triglycerides. So when you eat fat that's in the form of triglycerides that will enter your body, at some point it has to go through your liver and be processed, and your liver is going to convert whatever form that is into whatever form it needs. So the fat that is produced in your body is saturated fat, and you do not have to eat saturated fat in order to have that process happen. All right. So
I understand that part. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
I understand.
Yes. So saturated fat is not required in cholesterol production. Dietary saturated fat is not required in the synthesis of cholesterol.
Right. Okay, cool.
Serum cholesterol.
Yeah.
Okay. So in this second link here, he's gonna link us to a letter to the editor. All right. So this is not a study. This is a letter to the editor. Okay. And it's going to mention saturated fat intake and accrual of lean body mass. So again, when we compare vegan and omnivorous diets and we actually control for protein and calories, we don't see differences in how much muscle mass or strength increases are made. And so for me, the fact that we have those studies really puts the nail in the coffin for this topic in general, because if I can take someone on a zero cholesterol diet, a zero cholesterol, dietary cholesterol diet, and produce the same results when I equate calories and protein, I think that proves the null hypothesis true and then invalidates the hypothesis here. And right. For those of you who don't know, when you have a hypothesis, so the hypothesis here is that cholesterol increases muscle mass and strength. And the null hypothesis would be that cholesterol has no effect on muscle mass and strength. All right. And so going down here, he has another link. He has a paragraph. It says, in fact, the first study of cholesterol's effect on lean body mass, the authors also found a significant correlation between saturated fat intake and lean body mass growths. Many diet with a high cholesterol content are also rich in saturated fat, so this is not too surprising, but it leaves open the possibility that cholesterol is actually irrelevant and it's all about saturated fat instead. So like again,
wow.
he is continually throwing out alternative hypotheses or alternative propositions that invalidate the main one. To find out, the Bayesian research team contacted Dr. Reichman, who is the one guy who did all those studies, the principal investigator of the above studies on cholesterol. He confirmed that they controlled for the total fat intake in the analysis on cholesterol, strongly suggesting cholesterol plays an independent role for muscle growth. Now, in my notes, this is interesting here, huh, Dr. Lambert?
You wrote that, did you?
Yeah. So Dr. Lambert goes on to say here, however, we have some reservations on the mechanism of cholesterol impacting training responses through testosterone, which limits our enthusiasm. It is an attractive hypothesis since cholesterol is a precursor of testosterone. Certain low-fat diets reduce androgens, and there are indisputable effects of supraphysiological doses of testosterone and testosterone depletion on skeletal muscle. In our study, lean mass and saturated fat were significantly correlated, but after adjusting for dietary cholesterol, the association was greatly reduced. This may support what Dr. Lambert alludes to, that the data on fat intake and androgens could be an artifact of the strong association between dietary saturated fat and dietary cholesterol. For example, nutritional supplemental protocols known to enhance hypertrophy have also been shown to reduce or block testosterone responses to resistance training. In balance, some studies, but not all, have shown only hypertrophy training protocols increase testosterone, although bodybuilders do not tend to have a response. Our main reservation, however, is the minimal amount of evidence that normal viability in blood testosterone is associated with the normal viability in muscle gain with resistance training. For example, women only have 5 to 10% of the resting testosterone and no acute testosterone response to resistance training as compared to males, yet their short-term percent gains in muscle strength and mass are the same. So on the basis that dietary cholesterol, serum cholesterol, or saturated fat have this increase in testosterone, and that may be responsible for the increase in muscle mass gains, well, what he linked to here kind of disputes that claim entirely and says, look, when we look at, women, the increases that we see in muscle mass and strength for women compared to men proportionally relative to each one of them is the same. So I don't think that it makes very good evidence for this testosterone effect, because if we can have the same response in women who tend to have lower levels of testosterone and don't have the same response from exercise, that kind of supports the null hypothesis rather than the hypothesis. He goes on here, the cholesterol conspiracy theory. We love conspiracy theories on this podcast here.
Do. Yes, we do.
But
I'm
before
formulating
everyone
one right now.
But before everyone starts eating 10 eggs a day, we feel the research is a bit suspect. Then what is the point of the article?
I know, right?
Okay.
I've been thinking about this the whole time. I've been going,
Yeah.
Only about one egg intake.
Yeah. Only about 1 in 3 studies on the relation between cholesterol and muscle growth have been published, even though the research was conducted several years ago already. And most of the published research mentioned above was performed by the same principal investigator, Dr. Reichman, who received research grants totaling roughly $2.7 million that we could find from sources including the U.S. Poultry and Egg Association. However, it's just a fact that scientific research is expensive, so people willing to put a lot of money into it often have something to gain from it. Individuals like Brett Contreras, he's you don't know who he is, but he's big on glutes. And Menno Henselman, who is the author of this, that pay for scientific research out of their own pocket are very rare. And that's true indeed. And so I'm going to agree with him here that I don't find that who's paying for the study actually really matters that much. We want to go in and look at the methods and the results. And, if there's a problem, we can find them in there. There's not enough money to go around to do this kind of research. And so if the Egg and Poultry Association wants to fund research, then let them fund it.
Well, Dr. Reichman also received funding from
the American Heart Association and the U.S. Army. Not to mention, it's pretty darn far-fetched to pour billions of dollars and risk your career and reputation to promote, of all things you could sell, cholesterol specifically for, of all possible markets, individuals interested in muscle growth. Us meatheads are a tiny part of the population. Us meatheads interested in scientific research, tinier still. Yeah, and that's true. So I don't care who funded those studies. What I do care though is that it's basically one guy doing it. So what we
Yeah.
don't have is replication of his findings in the broader literature, right? So there isn't a lot that Menno could choose from here to provide evidence for this hypothesis. So that, is kind of a knock against it.
So I'm just going to throw something out there, and you may just be like, "Oh my God, Dwayne, why'd you have to say that?" Now I've got to explain it away. But I have actually known guys in my lifetime who did a lot of strength training, especially when they were younger, where they just consumed massive amounts of eggs,
Mm-hmm.
fried, scrambled, raw in some kind of weird protein shake that a bunch of my buddies got onto one time. I didn't. I was just a skinny musician. And most of those guys now have like severe, cardiology issues, um, high cholesterol, horrible health. I can't
Mm-hmm.
say that that was because of all of that, but I
Mm-hmm.
mean, these guys did that stuff for years. And at the time, they were huge and bulky, but I really can't, can you really equate that just to them eating lots of eggs? I don't think so. I just, they worked out hard like any normal person. And I just think that they went beyond that balance, of protein and cholesterol intake. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I don't think this guy's proving anything at all.
Yeah. So we get into the is cholesterol bad for your heart topic here. All right. So is cholesterol bad for the heart? He flat out says nope. And so there's a few claims that are made not supported by current evidence, recommendations, or even his own references. All right. So dietary cholesterol doesn't have a large impact on serum cholesterol. Now we have a problem here because this is stated right here. How much cholesterol you consume in your diet does not even influence how much cholesterol is in your blood. Now, there's a problem. There's another contradiction within his own article here, because if we go way back up here, he said
We just
statins had
saw
an
it.
influence,
Absolutely.
right? What do statins do? Lower your blood cholesterol.
That's
But
right.
he's saying that statins could potentially, have a negative effect on all of that. Well, then, okay. All right, but cholesterol uptake by the small intestine has a high degree of interpersonal variation. Even his own source reports absorption rates between 20 and 80% within populations consuming a low cholesterol diet, and 50 to 60% of dietary cholesterol reaches the circulatory system. So 50 to 60% of 20% of absorption is going to have a much different effect than 50 to 60% of 80% of absorption. Right. And so
Right.
this is his own reference here. And this is the one, yeah, intestinal absorption. So it talks about all of this stuff right here. So let's go back to my mind map. The most up-to-date research confirms this and increases the lower end to 29%. So instead of absorption rates being 20 to 80%, there's the latest research says it's between 30 and 80%. Serum cholesterol is affected more in persons with metabolic diseases such as hyperlipidemia and diabetes. Race and gender also play a huge role.
Mm.
The evidence that's cited here and in general reference fasting serum levels. And this generally doesn't take into account postprandial or after you've eaten cholesterol levels, in which chylomicrons and their remnants and the process of digestion can take up to 8 to 10 hours. So combined with high baseline serum cholesterols and high postprandial cholesterol, okay, the result is an increased exposure that is potentially more atherogenic, so placing you more at risk for heart disease. Most up-to-date research shows statistically insignificant increased correlation between cholesterol and CVD, coronary heart disease, and all-cause mortality. Each additional egg that is over 1 egg per day, there is a 1 to 6% increase in cardiovascular disease and a 4 to 8% increase in all-cause mortality. Now,
Wow.
we don't have to take my word for it.
Wow.
Can you eat eggs or will it raise your cholesterol? I'm Dr. Al, I'm a board certified cardiologist. So the data on eating dietary cholesterol is definitive. The more cholesterol you eat, the higher all-cause mortality and the higher cardiovascular mortality. Now, this is especially true once you're eating 400 milligrams to 1,000 milligrams of cholesterol a day. An egg is usually in the neighborhood of about 180 or so. Most Americans do not overconsume eggs, whether it's men and women. We eat about 200 to maybe 300 milligrams of cholesterol a day, which is usually what we recommend. So as long as you're eating 1, maybe 2 eggs a day, you're probably fine. Anybody that tells you you can eat thousands of them a day is just lying or just hasn't seen the data. But if you're eating like 3, 4, 5, 6 a day, then your all-cause mortality and cardiovascular mortality goes up. I have an entire chapter dedicated to this in my new cholesterol book. Follow me to find out when that's released.
All right. So not just my word for it.
I find it interesting he was doing that in his car.
He does a lot of them in his car. Yeah.
That's hilarious. That's hilarious.
Yeah. So every egg over 1 egg. So we find that 1 egg, there really tends to be no effect on mortality or cardiovascular disease. Every 1 egg that you consume over that is about, on average, about 3 or 4% increase in cardiovascular disease, and between 4 and 8% increase in all-cause mortality. Now, we do find a bunch of meta-analysis and systematic reviews that say that they found no relationship. The problem with those things is that right here, I have it shown that it's statistically insignificant, meaning that the confidence intervals, okay, so the point estimate is between 1 and 6% on cardiovascular disease, but the confidence interval would go from, 0.93 to 1.9. Okay, so it crosses that null association line. And so you can write out in your abstract that you found no association because the confidence interval crosses that line.
Right.
So that's where you're going to find systematic reviews and meta-analyses that say we found no increase or no relationship. But that's for every 1 egg, So you add 1 egg. So you're consuming 2 eggs now. Your increase goes up to whatever 4 or 5%, right? You add another egg, you're now up to 8 to 10%. You add another egg, right?
Right.
It keeps going up and up and up.
Okay, and but that has to be over a period of time too, right? Because just because I eat 3 eggs today doesn't increase my overall lifetime possibility.
Correct. Yeah. So what we're talking about is averaged.
Right.
So if you ate 6 eggs
a day,
one time, one
sorry.
day out of the week, that's going to average out to less than 1 egg a day.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you're correct there. Yeah.
However, the number is still pretty high if you do consistently eat, say, 3 eggs a day. That's your norm. Then those extra 2 eggs does raise you up. Would you say it's like 4 to 6%?
Yeah, for each egg, it's between 1 and 6. So probably 3 to 4% for each egg.
Yeah.
Which is statistically insignificant, and someone might look at that and say, well, it's a 1 to 3% increase in the risk, and that's fine, right? But it isn't to say that it doesn't have any effect at all is not true. It may be statistically insignificant, but the trend is an increase. You are not decreasing your risk of cardiovascular disease or all-cause mortality.
Right.
So our current guidelines have been changed from limiting cholesterol to 300 milligrams per day to the new recommendation is to keep dietary cholesterol consumption as low as possible without compromising the nutritional adequacy of the diet. All right, and I have links to our dietary guidelines, and this is also an article from Harvard, I think. Oh, the American Heart Association. Yeah, so great article here. Suggest reading that for everybody. All right. So another claim that's kind of produced in in this section here is that cholesterol is important for the body and highly regulated, and your body will produce its own cholesterol. So he goes on in here to say that Where is it? Cholesterol is so important for the body. It's highly regulated. If your diet does not contain much cholesterol, your intestines will increase their absorption to compensate. And if that's not enough, your body will produce its own cholesterol. So basically what he's saying is if you eat a bunch of cholesterol, your absorption rate is going to go down, and also your production rate will go down so that you can maintain, let's say, 1,000 milligrams of cholesterol per day in your body. If you reduce your intake of cholesterol, your absorption rate will increase, and also your production rate will increase so that you maintain this 1,000 milligrams per day. Let's call that true on its face. If my body is going to increase production and increase the rate of absorption, what then is the point in me consuming more cholesterol? If I'm always going to maintain the same serum cholesterol level, what would be the point in me making an effort to consume more?
I don't know.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I probably have a problem with that, right?
Yes.
Okay. So this argument here is also a red herring, meaning that it has nothing to do with the main point. It's just kind of a tangent off to the side. It distracts us from the real issue. This also is point of fact true, and it's not disputed by anyone. Yes, your body needs cholesterol. Yes, your body makes cholesterol. If you eat less cholesterol, your body will produce more cholesterol. That is all true, right? But it doesn't tell us how much we need. It's also self-refuting as to which, the question I just posed. If my body's going to make it, what is the point in me actively attempting to consume more? This also doesn't speak to what levels that either my dietary or serum are optimal for my heart health, or what levels reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease or coronary heart disease. Okay. And so he's going to go on here to talk about if you're consuming more dietary cholesterol, if total blood cholesterol increases at all during a high cholesterol diet, both good HDL and bad HDL cholesterol generally increase in the same proportion. So this is kind of a HDL to LDL ratio hypothesis, whereas that if your LDL goes up, it's okay as long as the HDL goes up with it. Okay. So from his own source, though, which is this Cambridge article, let me see if I can find it so you guys can see it in here, right here. Quote, however, the rise in HDL cholesterol with dietary cholesterol must be interpreted with caution. Indeed, it merely reflects the main role of HDL in cholesterol transport, but it cannot be taken to imply that this is beneficial. All right, so that is his reference. That's not something I found. The protective effects of HDL, and I don't know how much we should go into this. So HDL is considered the good cholesterol. The protective effects of HDL are found more in how well it functions rather than how much there is. We have pharmaceutical interventions in the past that have raised HDL, and it wasn't protective for heart disease. Okay. We also have data on people with genetically high and genetically low HDL. And the outcomes from those, so we're talking Mendelian randomization, having high HDL due to genetics is actually shown to have higher risk of heart disease. Okay. And then I have the links for everybody here. You guys want to go and see those. Okay. So on the face of whether or not cholesterol is bad for your heart and that dietary cholesterol doesn't really influence your serum cholesterol or your risk of heart disease, that's not really true. Okay. It's statistically insignificant, but consuming more dietary cholesterol, especially once you cross that threshold of 400 milligrams,
right,
you start increasing your risk.
Right.
And so going to his article here, this is kind of the end of it. He has his take-home messages. We're going to get to our take-home messages, but we're going to see some reporting. So if somebody was to try this for themselves, and they might say, listen, I have noticed that I feel better. I'm consuming more eggs now, or more cholesterol, and I'm reporting that I'm feeling better. My performance in the gym is better. So these are subjective feelings. Number one, they're anecdotal, and this is not really rigorous testing. Okay. Your own subjective feelings are highly subject to the placebo effect. And I have linked here, this is what we were going to actually talk about. So there's a new study out involving, let me see if it's this one. So resistance trained men. Oh, this one's on running. Okay, but mouth rinsing with a pink non-caloric artificially sweetened solution improves self-paced running performance and feelings of pleasure. So these are all a whole bunch of links on the placebo effect.
I didn't understand a thing about that.
Oh,
A pink non-caloric as opposed to the blue. Just
so
what is that?
So this is the one we were going to talk about today, the placebo effect of a pink non-caloric, so no calories, artificially sweetened solution on strength, endurance, performance, and physiological or psychological responses in trained individuals. So in this study here, what they did is they had two groups, and they gave one group a drink that was colored pink, and the other drink was clear. And there's no difference between the drinks, but when people consumed the pink drink, they reported feeling better, having better performance in the gym. So there's an effect of placebo, right? And so when we're talking about subjective feelings, like, well, all I did was consume more eggs, I'm feeling better, my performance is better. So what you're seeing, the outcome there is highly suspect to the placebo effect. Now, this isn't to say that you're not going to see a benefit, because in these trials here where we see people are given a placebo drink, okay, so in this one with the resistance training, people are given the same drink, one's just colored pink. There actually was an increase in muscle mass and strength out of that group.
That's amazing.
Okay, so we actually do see tangible measured outcomes from the placebo effect. So just because you may have started consuming more cholesterol and you report feeling better doesn't mean you're not necessarily going to see those outcomes. However, it's probably due to some other variable and not the one you think. So if we go back to our causality boat, right? Remember, you're standing on the shore, viewing somebody in the boat, moving the rudder, and you don't have the input on what the wind is doing out there. So you think that the outcome is that the rudder is broken.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. That's amazing. That's amazing. Maybe if I just listen to rock and roll before, if I have the right mixtape on, then then I'm better in the gym.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
All right. So take-home messages. He has his take-home messages here. This will be linked for you guys, and you can all go look at it. So we're going to talk about my take-home messages here. So does dietary cholesterol or even serum cholesterol support the increase in muscle mass? Let me see how I'm trying to put this. Does an increase in dietary or serum cholesterol equal greater increases in muscle mass or strength? So based on the evidence given here, I find this evidence to be less than convincing. Okay. Interesting topic, though. I really was excited to get into this and look through it. I'm not convinced. And so two main reasons. One is that we actually do have data on vegans versus omnivores and measuring actually muscle mass and strength increases in very well designed, very well executed randomized control trials.
Yep.
And then we also have, so the mechanism of action by which cholesterol might be providing this benefit, on the basis of testosterone, we see the same kind of strength and muscle increase, muscle mass increases in women as we do in men. So I think that falls flat on the basis of, cellular membrane viscosity.
Right.
I think that the evidence provided here falls flat on that as well. So my take homes, if you wanted to try this out for yourself, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I do have some caveats to just going out and doing this. Okay. So a few days ago, I put out a post on what the metabolic syndrome is. And so we know that dietary cholesterol influences serum cholesterol more in persons that have metabolic diseases, metabolic syndrome. So some things that I think people should potentially watch out for here. If you're male and you have HDL cholesterols less than 50, or LDL cholesterol greater than 130, or total cholesterol greater than 190. If you're female and you have HDL cholesterol less than 40, greater than 120, and total cholesterol, did I say LDL cholesterol? LDL cholesterol greater than 120.
Yes.
And total cholesterol greater than 180.
Yeah.
If your blood pressure is greater than 130/85, if you're male and your waist is greater than 40 inches, if you're female, your waist is greater than 35 inches, if your fasting blood glucose is greater than 100, or your HbA1c is greater than 5.5. Now, if you have between 1 and 3 of those things, I think that you should probably consult with your primary care physician, your doctor. You can give Kathy a call before you attempt to do something like this. If you have 3 or more of those conditions, I highly advise you not to attempt this.
Yes, agreed. Yeah.
All right. So that's that. I don't find the arguments here for cholesterol and muscle mass very, very convincing. And I think, so I don't want people to take home that this article is crap or that Menno doesn't know what he's talking about. What I think happened with this is the problem that we're having in general in this field is that people have to put out content. And so in order to do that, we might find very intriguing questions or hypotheses like this one. But, as we go back through all of his evidence and his citations, like I don't think there was a lot of effort put into reviewing those. And he also, says several times that he flat out says in one point that they find the whole thing kind of suspect. We feel the research is a bit suspect. So I think that this article is just probably just to put out something, right? Is just to put out information. And when you're in the social media sphere, you just kind of have the feeling that you have to put stuff out. You have an audience, they're looking to get information from you. And so you just put something out like this. So I think that's what this is. Menno is definitely a very, very smart person. He does contribute to the scientific evidence that we have, and I have heard definitely good stuff from him. So this article, though, I'm not impressed.
I just got to say that I think that there's a responsibility, though. Just if you look at the article, just on the face value of the first page, there is a draw to somebody who's looking for every advantage that they can get in the gym or for their dietary. Maybe they're just trying to get a little bit stronger, put a little bit more muscle on, at the same time maybe dropping some weight. I mean, you make your way through the first 2 or 3 paragraphs of this, or even the first 2 or 3 highlights there, in my opinion, of course, you'll find what you're looking for. Yeah. But you've drawn a conclusion without making it all the way down to the paragraph where he says this is like a little bit suspect. So I think there's a responsibility that I'm not saying that he did a bad thing here, but like you said, maybe he didn't research it as deep as he should have, or maybe he didn't care, or maybe he does care. I don't know, but you just have to have some responsibility when you're putting things out there on the internet now, because people will find what they want to hear unless you just straight up tell them no, and here's why. But this article didn't really do that. So
yeah, I really have a problem with all the stuff down here about cholesterol being bad for your heart. I know that this information exists out there on the internet. This is not supported by the broader scientific literature and the consensus on this. So, while dietary cholesterol doesn't have a large effect on your serum cholesterol, it does influence it, and we do see increases in the risk for disease and mortality, right? It's
Right.
not decrease. I've never seen anyone make the argument that increasing your dietary cholesterol is going to actually, that's not true, guys. Paul Saladino does. but most people like Menno here, the argument is like, well, you can eat it and it doesn't have any effect. No, it does. It
Yeah,
does.
it does.
And then we also have the problem where in general, the population average serum cholesterol and cardiovascular markers, the risk and everything is high anyway.
Yeah.
So I don't think that it's responsible to go about telling people, especially a community, which is going to be, meatheads, as he's calling them, who are already going to be generally consuming higher amounts of saturated fat and cholesterol, and then saying, well, go ahead and eat more on top of that. So when it comes to LDL cholesterol and risk, we know that for every 38-point reduction, your risk gets cut in half.
Right.
And the inverse of that is true. So every 38-point increase, your risk doubles. Right. So the normal range right now is 100. They want you to be below 100, but we actually know that the optimal range is below 78.
That's true.
Or I'm sorry, 70.
No, are you sure? 78 or 70?
It's 70.
Okay, I thought it was 78. My bad.
The optimal is below 70. So below 70, we start to see atherosclerosis, cardiovascular disease, coronary heart disease basically drops down to almost zero. Under 50, it's gone entirely. And so you had the question earlier, well, how much?
Right.
Well, we fought the recommendations now, everything that we know about diet and disease outcomes, the recommendations are you need to get your serum cholesterol as low as possible, as early in life as possible.
Right.
And so let's say your cholesterol is 138, okay? And your risk at 138, let's say that's 10%. If we drop your cholesterol down from 138 to 100, your risk now goes down to 5%.
Right.
And then from 100, if you get it down to 62, so another 38-point drop, your risk goes down to 2.5.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep.
So take everything with a little bit of skepticism here. A lot of these diseases take, multiple decades to manifest. So were you to take 4 to 6 months, okay, given all the caveats that I put out there, so you have relatively normal numbers of all these things, and you just want to take a short period of time, 4 to 6 months, where you're going to increase your dietary cholesterol and see if this improves something, I really don't think that that's going to have a large impact, right? As long as after that period of time, we went back down to some normal cholesterol intakes. I wouldn't continue this for years and years and years. I don't think that that's appropriate, but if you're to do a short intervention, that's probably not gonna have much effect on what's going to happen 50 years from now.
Right. I agree. But that's if the person that tries this or that wants to do this for just a short time, they need to meet all those markers you just talked about a few minutes ago.
Yeah. And if your markers, if your markers are above those numbers, I would really advise working on those first, because you're only increasing your risk of dying early down the road. So
yeah. So you talked about decades for some of these things to manifest in your health. But by the way, so then when they do manifest, it's a lot harder to deal with it than it is 30 years ago. Cool. Awesome.
All right. Well, as always, I hope someone got something out of this. Dwayne, hope it blew your mind.
Did. Absolutely did. Answered good questions too.
Yeah. All right. And we will see everybody next time. Lamby out.